Growing up in the public eye is a very bruising experience, and it's really hard to develop and change.
The goal of feminism is to make itself redundant. We want to get to a world where we no longer need feminism.
Is that what a woman has to do in the world, is lose weight to like get attention? For me, it was so much bigger. It was about just being the healthiest version of me, so it wasn't about a size or a number or whatever.
Girls today, we encourage so much diversity, but women have always been diverse. It just hasn't been acknowledged and it hasn't been accepted.
Women find their strength, their superpower together. And that's why I think women are leading the climate movement against the climate crisis. And I just want to acknowledge that and applaud it.
Join us in celebrating 10 years of 100 Women on BBC World News.
I'm Ross Atkins with Outside Source. This is the extraordinary story of climate change. Vaccines from Ukraine. Let's look at some of the international reaction. Tell us what you've been hearing. In practical terms, what does that mean?
Piece the story together with Ross Atkins. Outside Source on BBC World News.
Whoa! There is art all over Istanbul, but this has to be the strangest of all.
Music is such an important tool in our lives, not just to bring pleasure, but also to heal and to bring hope.
We're just in a period now that African brands are just owning that, owning what we have and projecting it in however they see fit.
I just love this place because this is somewhere where memory itself is set in stone.
This festival is all about light over darkness, the triumph of good over evil. And that idol over there, Kali, stands as a symbol of hope and power to everyone in the community.
Inspiring arts and culture on BBC World News.
This is BBC World News. The headlines. Pro-democracy activists in Myanmar say they are holding a silent strike to mark 2 years since the military seized power. The US, Britain, Canada and Australia have announced new sanctions to coincide with the anniversary of the coup. The US Vice President Kamala Harris will be among the people attending the funeral on Wednesday of Tyree Nichols, a black man who died after being beaten by several police officers in Memphis. Pope Francis has been celebrating Mass in Kinshasa, the capital of the Democratic Republic of Congo. More than 1 million people are estimated to have attended the service. Officials in Australia say they have found a small radioactive capsule which fell off a truck on a desert highway in January. The device, the size of a small coin, was found by the side of the road. Those are the headlines here on BBC World News.
Now on BBC World News, the latest business news from across the globe. World Business Report.
Wall Street ends January on a strong note as investors digest the latest earnings reports and look ahead to the outcome of the latest US Federal Reserve meeting. And India announces its budget for 2023 with the current Prime Minister Narendra Modi hoping for a third consecutive term in office. Hello and welcome to World Business Report. I'm Tadhg Enright. Well, let's start in the United States, where the latest interest rate decision from its central bank, the Federal Reserve, is coming later today. An increase of 0.25% is forecast, that on top of a wave of aggressive increases last year. But there is optimism that the historically high inflation at the root of the problem could be running out of steam. The latest data from the US Labor Department shows the growth in wages slowing in the last quarter, quarter of 2022. That has filtered through as well to a strong performance on Wall Street in Tuesday's session. You can see in a moment, or right here, right now, the closing prices in the session yesterday. And it comes on top of a healthy session for the entire month of January, actually. The figures are impressive too. The Dow closing up 2% over the course of the month. The S&P up by 5%. In fact, the S&P 500 closed, had its best January since 2019. Well, our North America business correspondent Samira Hussein has more now from New York.
2022 was the worst year for the stock market since 2008. But this year, so far, is proving to be different, with financial markets posting strong gains for the month of January. On Wednesday, though, all eyes move to Washington for the latest interest rate decision. Now, traders are expecting to see rates increase by 25 basis points, a far cry from the aggressive interest rate hikes last year, when America's central bank raised interest rates by 0.75% 4 times. But the last few inflation reports showed that actually those price increases are starting to slow down, which means the Fed can take a more gradual approach to rate hikes. Now, Wall Street will be parsing the statement released by Fed officials for guidance on just how many rate increases it can expect and how aggressive they will be for this year.
Well, the European Union is responding to pressure to protect its industries from the threat of US subsidies. President Biden's Inflation Reduction Act also contained measures to boost its electric car industry, something European manufacturers claimed put them at a disadvantage. Well, the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen is today expected to lay out proposals which could include loosening state aid rules and proposing a new European sovereignty fund. Well, we're joined now by Klaus Vistensen, who's the chief Eurozone economist at Pantheon Macroeconomics. Thanks for being with us today, Klaus. Give us more detail, will you, on what we're expecting to hear from Ursula von der Leyen?
Well, I think the EU is probably thinking in a couple of along the side of a couple of routes in terms of responding to this US sort of Inflation Protection Act. I think maybe the recovery fund, which was set up after COVID, is being thought of as maybe could supply some funds, maybe to some strategic industries. But certainly, you know, you mentioned it yourself, the easing of state aid rules, I think, is an obvious one that the EU is going to use. And as far as the new fund, I mean, again, like I said, they already have one, the recovery fund. So, I mean, they might do a new one, or they might just beef up the current one. I mean, I don't see there's a distinction there. But the state aid rules, I think, could be the big announcement, because that's sort of a very EU thing. And if they do that, that would show that they are sort of more serious in doing something to counter this, if you will.
Yeah, just talk to me a little bit more about that state aid dimension to it all. And I should say, actually, I believe Ursula von der Leyen is actually on her feet right now speaking. If indeed the EU does shift the dial, as it were, on state aid, it's something that historically it's been opposed to. How significant would that be?
I mean, that would be very significant. I mean, the EU the Commission has basically been sort of the polar opposite of allowing state aid, right? State aid is something you do in countries that are less efficient, and it's something that you should kind of not do, because it's a sort of anathema to growth and sort of overall productivity. But now, of course, we're in a different environment. There's general political recognition that there are some industries that are strategic, important, worth supporting. So I think that would be a big step. In a way, it's already happening, but that it would still be a big announcement, I think, if they're moving towards that sort of more towards that direction.
OK, Klaus Vistensen, thank you very much for joining us with your thoughts today. Well, let's cross to India now, where the country's finance minister has been revealing the government's budget for 2023. India's economic growth is expected to be 7% this year, which is lower than the government's 8.7% target. Well, Prime Minister Narendra Modi has a general election to think about early next year. And of course, he hopes that a strong economic performance will boost his chances of a third consecutive term in office. Well, joining us now from Mumbai is our India business correspondent, Archana Shukla. So, Archana, what have we been hearing today from the finance minister?
Well, this was the last full-year budget before general elections next year and key state elections this year. And it did see the government do a lot of the heavy lifting with the policies and also trying to appease the rising middle class in India. Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman, when she started her speech, did allude to the fact that India has emerged as the bright spot among major economies despite the global headwinds, and her policies are trying to push this growth forward by boosting consumption and boosting spending in the market. Like the policy on increasing capital expenditure to $122 billion. That's a 33% increase in government spending on building infrastructure and assets like roads, airports, adding regional connectivity, among others. And the government feels this will push to create more jobs and push growth in the economy. They also hope that increase in their capital expenditure will also bring in private investments, which has still in the last few years been subdued in the market. That's the hope. The other major set came in for the salaried middle class. That's a rising class in India, and the finance minister tried to reach out to them with major tax breaks. If they try to move to the new tax regime, up to $8,500 of salary will not have to pay any taxes. However, there has been a sharp cut in welfare spending for the government, especially on social buffer schemes like the Rural Job Guarantee Scheme, and the health expenditure has been kept flat. Some experts say this could be an overtly optimistic budget if the growth doesn't follow through.
OK, Archana Shukla in Mumbai, thank you very much. Well, closer to home here in the UK, the government's pressing ahead with plans to regulate cryptocurrency in the same way as mainstream financial services. The new proposals are being unveiled today. Cryptocurrencies, of course, had a tough time in 2022. The price of Bitcoin, which is the world's biggest cryptocurrency, seesawed. And you had exchanges like FTX also in the headlines for the wrong reasons. But despite a difficult 12 months, there are still some of the industry who believe in the value of crypto.
I think one of the important things to keep in mind is that the success of cryptocurrencies is predicated on economic turmoil. The current market situation is kind of sort of exactly what we predicted would happen, which means that a monetary policy will be less of a factor in indicating factors like inflation. And so nation states will be less able to influence monetary policy, and that separation between money and state, so to speak, is what cryptocurrencies are there to help bridge. So I think as a businessman, I just want clarity, right? I just want to understand what rules apply so I can apply them. I think what causes a lot more problems is uncertainty, and that specifically in the US, where it's just not clear which regulator will oversee what. And so I'm all for sensible and smart regulation that protects consumers. We just want consistent guidelines. We're involved with different regulators around the world, but there's a lot of nuance, and every country really does it differently.
Investors, of course, always seeking certainty. That's your World Business Report for now. Don't forget, you can keep in touch with me and the rest of the @BBC Business team on social media. I'm @Tadhg Enright. Until next time, bye-bye.